All right, I am going to call the Capital Planning Committee School Research Subcommittee meeting to order for January 7th, 2022. It is 12:06 p.m. And I'll just note before we get into anything that this is really a public meeting for a working group. And that's why we don't have our full contingent of members that are typically here. But we will be having another full committee meeting on Monday, January 10th. So that, Kathy, I don't know if you want to start on where you're at, what data you may need from the town capital planning side, or if you have any thoughts on how we go about this.
So can we get one little admin thing out of the way first, since this is a public meeting?
Yeah.
So at our last full meeting, we didn't decide who was going to do minutes. So that's got to get done. And then I'll do the minutes for this one.
Okay. I
did the two prior to that. So it's Katura's turn or your turn to do that one, the last one, and I'll do this one.
I actually got through most of them today. So I will take those, and I'll also need to do just a quick write-up for our joint when you and I were at advisory together. But that's going to be one sentence because I don't think there was any topics pertaining to this subcommittee. So that's great if you can take today, and I'll take the last full meeting.
All right. That's out of the way. Okay. So you want me to jump in?
Yeah, you kind of drive whatever you need, or where you're at, or anything else you want to discuss related to the MSBA topic in particular.
Okay, so let me just throw something in this conversation that I just found out this morning by chance. That is, it's called this an interesting fact. And it involves Needham. Needham is contemplating building an $80 million school right now. I don't know what grades it is. I think it's elementary. The reason I know this is I know the guy that is the Needham town moderator. I work with him on business. So we compare notes quite often as far as our town goes. So it's actually fun talking to him. So he just sent me an email this morning and about something else, but then he mentioned, he always wants to know what's going on, that they just had a special and to approve the school project, and it failed. It was a 75, of course, it had to be a 2/3 vote, and it failed by quite a bit. It was, I don't know, 75-25 against. I mean, it wasn't even close, it didn't sound like. So I've asked him, what he said it all. It got basically out on social media, facts got twisted, which shouldn't surprise us, etc. So I asked him to give us more details as far as what went wrong. That doesn't mean it's done for good, I guess, but at least I thought that was interesting because, Needham's a pretty affluent community too. They've got a really good school system also. So that kind of surprised me. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in there, given what we're doing. If this were to go forward, and one of the choices is to rebuild Neary, it's their project sounds a lot like ours. Okay,
and
so
do you know if it was MSBA funded
yes,
or not?
Yes. Okay, so I should have told you that. So it sounds like their reimbursement rate is 23% because he told me the numbers. He said, and this was, it's going to be funded this much by the town, this much by the state. We call it the state, but he meant MSBA. And so I did the math, and their reimbursement looks like it's not as good as ours, 23%. And I would think that Needham is probably more affluent than Southborough when you put the numbers together. So that doesn't surprise me. But yeah, he said it failed.
Okay.
So, yeah. So they were proposing MSBA funding.
Okay. That'd be great to get as much detail on that as possible.
Okay, with that, so I haven't done a whole lot more since we talked last about this. I'd already done some work. I need to do more. I still haven't talked to John Lemieux. We have emailed back and forth, but I haven't talked to him since I got back on Tuesday night. So I've got to pick up the phone and call him, which I was going to do this morning, but then the day got away from me like they do. So I haven't talked to him this morning.
Okay.
I hoped I would have more info by the time we got on this, but I don't. So I am a little bit behind where I needed to be to make this a really productive meeting. What I've discovered so far, I think probably is going to make me conclude that 37% is a lot of money to walk away from. And even though there are certainly some cons with MSBA, I think the pros will probably outweigh the cons in the end. Because, when you talk about a, $60 to $80 million building, 40% of that is a ton of money. So that's where I think it will land when I conclude. I'm just trying to conclude before I have John influence me unduly. So I want to make my own conclusion, and I think I'm there. And then I want to compare notes with him and see what he says, in case I've missed something as far as what he thinks pros and cons are. So I intend to try to get him on the phone this afternoon, so that by the time we meet on Monday, I have had that phone call with him. So I hope I can speak a little bit more coherently then.
Okay.
I just don't know if I can get him today, so I have no idea what his schedule is. So assuming I can get him today, I will try very hard to have that conversation before our meeting on Monday.
Okay. And I guess two things I would throw out there are, may not be for Monday, but whenever you two compare notes, if it makes sense for him to come to a meeting once you two, like, especially, right, regardless of whether, I guess, you're in lockstep or you have differing views, like if we want to arrange that, let's just, obviously we know calendars are tough. And then two, I think when I look at it from the town capital side, cost is obviously critically important, but timeline is huge too. And what I would want to say or see as we go through this is, I think we have a breaking point. I don't know what the exact year is, where if we don't execute on a plan, you could have divergence, right? Of, council on aging goes and does a senior center on their own, or recreation goes with their needs, library goes with their needs.
Yep.
In which case you have 3 to 4 capital projects competing against each other, which is obviously what we're all trying to avoid at this point in time. So I think timing is important just because it allows you to bring a comprehensive plan, but also, and I don't know what the answer is to this, but also when you think about bonding, right, is we know what rates are now. We're likely not to be in this good of an environment 3 years from now, but who knows what 6 years from now would look like. And I don't know how to think about that, but I just look back to public safety building where we were able to bond, like what Brian had projected and we presented to town meeting ended up being incredibly wrong. Not because Brian didn't do everything he was supposed to do, but because the environment changed and he shortened the terms that he did the bonding and actually lowered the impact on all of our taxes. Obviously, no one's going to argue if you're lowering the impact of what we presented, but we all run the flip side of this argument too of, if you present and are too aggressive with bonding terms, et cetera. And I don't know what the proper term is that you would bond any of this over, but I would think, given that you're talking about a project that will span multiple generations, right? Like this is something that if you do it right could last 30 plus years, that would be, I think, a strategy in terms of finding, because we know we're talking about large numbers. So I'm just trying to figure out how we factor in that interest component in particular down the road, because does that impact, your 36% and change of MSBA reimbursement?
Good point, because if anything, the MSBA process could slow down the project. It wouldn't speed it up. It could slow it down. So that's one of the cons, in that you don't have a lot of control over the timeline. If you're going to work with MSBA, you're going to be within their timeline. So we can't just, so that's a factor. So let's talk about what you just said for a second. If you could project or predict what interest rates are going to be in 6 years, you're in the wrong business, right?
Mhm.
Brian can't do it either. Neither can their bond consultants. You have a general idea that they've got to go up, right? But we thought that before too, a few years ago, and they still went down again. So you don't know. So you just got to be in touch with your bond consultants that he works with, and to me, the one thing you could do is talk about doing perm financing earlier than you would otherwise, if you've got the ability to do it, doing some type of financing that sits on the shelf to take advantage of rates. So I agree that that's a whole separate discussion. And when you're talking about $50 million of debt. It's a lot of interest, no matter what. 1% of that is a lot of money over time. So we have no control over interest rates. We don't have complete control. We can't pick the time because this is a long term. This is going to take a while to get built, no matter what, even if you don't use MSBA. So you're right, that's out there. So what I thought would be the way to do this, I want to put John Lemieux's viewpoints in this. So I'm going to, in the report that I wish I could have written by Monday, I'm not sure I'll get it done. I may have a draft report. So I'm going to try my best. I've got time this week to work on this, is to have in there his thoughts, period, whether they agree or disagree. So you understand where he's coming from, get him to look at the report, make sure he agrees with us. So it really is presented kind of as a joint report from both of us, that we both agree with what's in it. But it reflects what we both know and have learned cumulatively in one place. So it's kind of our document that we work with going forward as far as the pros and cons of MSBA. But let's take this a little bit further. Let's talk about timelines so that we don't end up, because, you know, if Council on Aging and our library and our rec want to come forward with their own warrant article to town meeting, they can do it, right? We don't want that to be the way it goes. That'd be kind of a mess if it happens. But certainly their prerogative to do it if they want to do it. So it's definitely something that could happen. If we, you know, I know you now know that town meeting is being pushed back to possibly the last week in April or the first week in May, right? Which I think is very helpful for us as far as this goes, because if we can get the MSBA decision made in March, we still may be able to convince the board of selectmen to reopen that warrant and get on that warrant what we need to get the feasibility piece of it started. And I'll go.
It's actually already there. It's
okay.
there.
All right, I didn't remember. Okay, so good. So that part's there. So you've got the placeholder there, right? So that if we get the green light in March, or before, then we've got the ability to go the next step if that's where we still think we are. So that's a good thing. So that was one of the advantages of pushing it back. So I was happy to hear that for many reasons. So let's just assume everything, you know, that we think this is a right answer, that, you know, we go to school committee and say, yes, you can certainly close the school based on all this work we've done, the demographics. And, you know, we think that the better alternative is to close Woodward and to rehab Neary, and school committee agrees. So then they agree and they want to go forward to the town with the project, right? So that, you know, we really do have all agreements in place by the 2022 town meeting. So the 270-day clock starts, right, as far as that goes. So that's what 3/4 of a year. So that takes us to, let's say, the end of 2022, right, for the most part. Right, and let's say it's still a green light at that point, that we present the design, MSBA approves it. I don't know what their timeline is as far as doing that, but I'm sure it's not overnight. So let's say that's another, what do you want to say? 6 months?
It's a couple. If you actually look at, they have a chart on their website. Like, it's years. I think it's probably the easiest way to think about it. Plural.
Before they actually approve that feasibility study and say, yes, we agree, you've got a good project here, and now let's go forward with it. So
they can move it around, right? So like, if let's just say March, you got good news from an MSBA perspective, they can give you that good news, but say, you know what, we're not going to have time to work with you. We're not starting your 270-day clock until, I don't know, call it September. Or they could say, yeah, we're ready to start working with you now. That's, I think, a big question mark to me of what's their capacity, right? And only they're going to be able to answer that question. You know, obviously, Greg and the schools aren't going to know that either. So, but just looking at some of these other timelines, it's years plural before you're anywhere close to going to town meeting for construction funding.
And see, Jason, that's one of the big cons of MSBA. You have no control of the timing yourself. You truly are at their mercy as far as their calendar goes. And then if we really are going into a period of increased interest rates, I don't know if slow or fast, but increasing, then you do, you know, end up paying more interest using MSBA, probably not anywhere near the interest. The interest increase probably is not going to be more than offset by losing the 37%. I will say that it take a whole lot of interest rate increases to do that. But that's one of your big cons, is you just don't have any control over when. And then you mentioned these other projects may get really antsy and just don't want to wait. You've also got NERI that no matter what needs work soon. And so you end up having to spend money there that you might not have spent otherwise because you had to keep waiting for MSBA. So that's one of your biggest cons right there.
So for your, I think for your report, I just want to give you what I have from the school capital plan related to NERI over the next like 3 years, just because I think it factors into any math you're doing, is they have parking lots in the next 3 years for a couple $100,000. They have a roof as early as next year, which is based on a professional report, for 1.2 million. And they have windows for 600,000 in year 5. And then there's been discussion, but I haven't seen any numbers around it, around the electrical system there. And that's just to continue to maintain it in its existing capacity. The good news is the other schools have I don't want to call it nothing, but very little that needs to be done in the coming years.
And I don't know what your thinking is, whether NERI is almost a tear down and start all over, because sometimes it's easier to do that than try to rehab existing one. I just hate to throw away $1.2 million on a new roof if you're going to have to do a new roof. Anyway, so maybe we just don't know. There's so, whether that new roof could stand and still be part of the new construction. So, we're such a long way from understanding whether we are rehabbing the existing building. How, are we going to gut the existing building, keep the shell? Are we going to almost start all over?
I mean, I know I referenced in our last meeting the new construction rate. I would try to see if John has any data around renovation rates these days and what they're seeing on a circa 1970 building. Because I know when we did it for public safety, the numbers were basically ended up being very close to the same. And that was it was a 1970s building on fire, and obviously a 1920s-ish on police.
Yep.
But I mean, I think that would be a critical factor here. And I know the 37-ish% is not on everything. So I think that would be, there's certain pieces that you can't do. I don't remember which one is which.
And I've got the pieces, so that's going to be in the
Okay.
report. So you're right. It's on the big pieces, I will say that, but you're right. It's not on everything. So you're right. So lots of wild cards here. Okay. So that's what I've got as far as where I stand. So, my task is to get him on the phone and truly compare notes between now and Monday.
Okay.
Trying to have a coherent draft report ready, so that at least we'll get on the email before the meeting. Obviously, we won't talk about it, but at least try to get it posted so that you've got it and maybe can give it a quick read before we meet.
Yeah, even if you have to verbally walk us through it and we don't have time for a pre-read, I just think it's helpful to see what direction we're headed, because then it drives some of the other discussions too, right? On the town side. The good news is we're a lot further along than with the Woodward plan, if that were to become an option, than we were at the last meeting, and have cleared the hurdles that were in front of us at that time. So, now it's going to be like, all right, that's why I'm actually focused on, me, I'm very concentrated on the numbers, but the timeline piece is just the big item here. And I think when you look at the capital over the next couple of years, it actually goes like this. It's decreasing, even with public safety, and you get through that major hump of public safety. So if you're looking at a bond 2 to 3 years out, it's actually not going to have the impact that it would on top of like if we had done this 2 years ago.
But even the problem with that, which of course I preach, which is if you keep things steady, right, then I believe the impact on most people is more palatable than you go down and then you come way back up, right? It's just
Oh,
hard.
yeah.
People, they like steadiness, right? That's why the public safety building fit very nicely into what we had. We didn't have to increase taxes a lot. There wasn't a big bump because of it. So yeah, maybe if he goes down, then it comes back up. So that's when you start talking about maybe we really do need to get this capital stabilization fund or a stabilization fund in place. So we really do try to level out what's going to happen here once we've got a little bit better idea of what could happen here.
Right, and this goes into what the ARPA committee is going to have to focus on too,
Yeah.
right? If they have an understanding of what's ahead, that
Yeah.
may help them. But it also goes to your comment of accelerating the bond, right? If you can take out a lot, we tend to take out bonds at the end of projects, at least what I've seen so far.
Yes, we do.
And I think you could also have a discussion around, obviously there's a ton of upfront engineering here that we didn't have necessarily as much of, like on the public safety building, because of the cost of the overall construction here. Do you pay for that more through appropriation and less through bonding? Because you have the capacity to flatten it out, which then leaves you with less debt going forward. I mean, that's obviously a conversation that advisory and the finance team are going to have to take up at some point once the numbers crystallize a little more.
Very good point. I've never delved into Brian's thought process on why he likes to do the temp financing upfront and then permanent. I think he just wants to wait till it's done. He knows what the numbers are, is probably the main reason for it. The bond group that he uses, they're very good. So I was part of the meeting where we decided to shorten the term of the public safety building bonds. And he's got a very competent firm that he works with and runs things by and gets their advice. So my guess is they will have some pretty good ideas about what we could do here if we really did want to try to lock in potentially lower interest rates up front and not use temp financing. Go ahead and, at least in part, start rolling out perm bonds for these things, assuming you can, which I think.
Yeah, I mean, you could, you're going to incur at least a certain cost.
Yeah. So
right? Like you don't have to do the whole thing, right? Obviously, if we had bonded the whole public safety up front, we'd be sitting on a lot of cash right now that we didn't use. So,
right, so that's another good. So
there's
you're right.
Pros and cons, right?
Yeah. So you definitely. So you're right. So you want to make sure you don't overdo it too. Get what you know for sure, and then maybe leave the rest up to the end. So anyway, okay. So I've got my work cut out for me, but I will do my dead level best to be ready on Monday with something that we can work with and finalize very quickly.
Sounds like a plan. All right, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All right. Okay. Then one more thing before you go. Can then you, if you've got a couple more minutes, call me so we can talk about something outside this committee that is capital related that came up at advisory the other night?
I can do that. So I will move that we adjourn the Capital Planning School Research Subcommittee.
All right, and I will second that motion.
Okay, roll call, Cook
Aye.
and Malinowski is aye.
All right.